members in agreement?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Good, perfect. Thank you. Mr. Brooks, please take it away.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Nick Brooks, and I am the acting chair for the Board of Adjustment today, Wednesday, August 18th, 2021 at 1:01 p.m. I would like to welcome you to the Board of Adjustment public hearing. Before we begin, I would like to make a few general comments about the Board of Adjustment and the manner in which the hearing will be conducted. Members of Adjustment are appointed by the City Council. We give our time freely and receive no financial compensation for that time. No action or decision on a case sets a precedent. Each case is decided upon its own merits and circumstances. Unless otherwise indicated, each use is presumed to be a legal use. We have been fully briefed by staff prior to this hearing and have also reviewed a detailed docket which explains the points of each case. Any evidence you wish to submit to the board for consideration on any of the cases that we hear today should be submitted to the board secretary when your case is called. This evidence must be retained in the board's office as part of the public record for each case. Letters of the board's action today will be mailed to the applicants shortly after today's hearing and will become part of the public record for each case. Lastly, all people registered to speak on any of the cases today were required to register with staff before addressing the board. Some rules of procedure. Each registered speaker will have 3 minutes to address the board. The board secretary will call the time at 3 minutes. If requested by the speaker or desired by the board, I may request a motion and vote on a specific time to complete presentations or continue to address the board. Our intrepid board members today include Matt Schaus, Jared Slade, and Matt Vermillion. Also here today to assist the board are members of city staff. Staff members present include Anna Holmes, Assistant City Attorney, Robin Gerard, Public Information Officer, Latanya Jackson, Board Secretary, Jennifer Munoz, Chief Planner and Board Administrator, Pamela Daniel, Senior Planner, Charles Trammell, Development Code Specialist, David Navarez, Engineering Division, Andrea Udrea, and Carolina Umet, Interim Assistant Directors, and Dr. Eric A. Johnson, Interim Director. We have a compliance case last on the agenda. That's BDA 201-023 for OT Tavern, and we'll go into the more specific rules for that case when it's called. I believe this is the point where we ask for public testimony to be given. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. A brief comment before we entertain any public testimony. In the board briefing earlier today, we discussed all the cases, but with specific respects to case numbers 190090, 190091, 190092, and 190093. We received information that the applicant and opponents have asked for the case to be held over until November 17th of 2021. While we didn't vote on it, the board seemed inclined to grant that request. If you still would like to speak on the matter, you're welcome to, but we are in all likelihood going to hold that case over till November. That comment being made, if there's any public testimony, staff will call on you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would like to point out to everybody who is an applicant or representative on the case today, please be advised we do have a 4-member panel. All 4 members are required in order to approve a case, and in order to deny it, it's 3. And so moving forward, that's what we can expect of the action today. Now, thanks again for joining us. This is Jennifer Munoz, the board administrator. And at this time, we can go ahead and get started with the minutes. I'm sorry, did we make a motion for the minutes yet?
No, a motion hasn't been made.
Matt Shells, I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Yeah, that's Schaus with the motion and Slade with the second.
And with that
All in
said, we
favor,
can
say
go
aye.
ahead and do unanimous. Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. A few other comments here. As we only have 4 members today, 4 votes are required to grant any request and 3 votes are required to deny or hold a case under advisement. All future motions will be called by each member's name. A roll call for votes is required to properly record all votes. As we are online, please mute your mics when you are not speaking. If you have a question, please wave your hands to get my attention. Please limit crosstalk by waiting your turn once you've raised your hand. And if I happen to miss your hand, please just speak up.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sorry for jumping the gun. I don't know how I got lost in that beginning part of our opening. So we can go ahead and get started now with our public testimony. We do have speakers registered for case BDA 201-023. And the first one on our list, let's see. Jennifer Bailey.
Not present.
Thank you, Robin. Do you know who's the next person on our list who is present?
Darren DeTallo.
Darren DeTallo? Mr. DeTallo, are you with us?
I am. Which case are we on? Excuse me. That case number didn't
This is the
sound
public-
familiar to me.
You're registered for public testimony on BDA 201-023.
Is that the OT Tavern case or the?
Correct.
Okay,
OT
I
Tavern.
apologize because there were both cases that I was intending to speak on, but I thought we were doing the other one, 190-090. So, but on the OT Tavern, I'll just defer to Naomi, who I understand has struck an agreement and intends to drop the case. So I'll just leave it at that.
For OT Tavern? Okay, yes, Mr. Vermillion.
I've got a question. With respect to dropping the case, the applicant is the city, correct?
Correct.
Is the city dropping the case?
That's what I was told as of last night and this morning. Are they not online?
Do we have whoever's representing the city?
My understanding was that they had reached a settlement.
This is a public testimony portion. Are you guys wanting to hear from the representative?
I'm wondering if Naomi or someone from community prosecution is on that could just provide just the facts to clarify.
Hi, I wasn't allowed to unmute earlier. And I don't know if you can see me, but yes, both parties in OT Tavern and the city have reached a settlement agreement. We would like to ask the board to dismiss the case without prejudice. We weren't able to get the agreement or the letter or anything in writing prior to. We literally just finished signing it this morning.
Thank you for that clarification, Nan. We are in the public testimony. Ooh, sorry about the feedback. Since we're in the public testimony section, we do want to give people an opportunity to continue and make their comments. However, those of you that have signed up for the compliance case, you now have additional information. And again, you can choose to either make your comments, or you may decide that at this point you don't want to, since it appears a settlement has been reached for the board to consider accepting.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Naomi. With that said, we can go ahead and proceed with our next speaker on public testimony. Do we have Dennis Steinball?
No, not present. Martha Carlson is the next speaker present.
Ms. Carlson, are you with us? And would you like to address the board?
Yes, I'm Martha Carlson. I'm the Glencoe Park Neighborhood Association president. And I had the understanding, as Darren does and Naomi, that there's been a settlement signed, but I want to continue with this, that as we were going into this, I had just as many, I had additionally more residents of my neighborhood that have come forward to me and want me to represent them, saying that the problems have continued, and that they're adamant about, this changing. And with the agreement that's come up, hopefully that this bar eventually will not be in this inappropriate use in our residential area, because there's been so many problems. These problems have tapped down, but they still are ongoing and continuing. And the fervor and the interest of my neighborhood association and the adjoining neighborhood that I talk with, neighbors and neighborhood, have not ceased in their interest for this to stop. I'm still getting messages just now through Nextdoor, through my email, and for me personally being out in my front yard, what is happening and what is going on. It's about safety and security. I think with the new chief of police, there's been some changes, and there's been more and some attention given to the Lower Greenville area. So I appreciate that, and I'm going to be here every time. And then also, I will continue speaking out against this, about security and safety. This is an inappropriate use, and I don't think that bottle service needs to be in a bar in close proximity to a residential area, going till 2 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carlson. Our next speaker is Bruce Richardson. Is he with us?
Got me? Can you hear me?
Hi, Mr. Richardson, please. Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Excellent. Panelists, I'm speaking directly to you about this. This is a bad deal. One of the worst deals I've ever had to just hold my stomach and say, okay, we'll do it. And here's why. And you need to hear this. You heard a case like this a month before, arguably a worse case. Your board attorney gave you advice during that hearing to stick to your standard, the black letter standard on your page. Yet when you read your rationale into the record, you made up your own standard. You made up standards that were not a part of your black letter standard. And mistakes get made. I grant you that. This was a large one, though. And I'm speaking to you now because all that's left of this is a teachable moment. And that teachable moment is, no matter how counterintuitive or how few times you see a type of case, you may never see one of these cases for the rest of your service. My panel Never saw one in 8 years. I had argued them before I was on the board, but never when I was a member of the board. And all I can do is urge you for each and every case you see to read every word of your standard, every letter of every word, and don't let any other thought or any other criterion enter your head, only the black and white. This deal isn't cause for celebration. They'll essentially get to go on and pretty much display the same kind of behavior they have for another 2 years. But in this case, seeing what happened on another case of its type and not being able to have absolute faith that you could follow every word of this standard, there was no choice. That's what we're stuck with. So I offer you that in kindness. I offer you that as a means of just reassuring you that when you show up once a month, it's one of the most important jobs in the city of Dallas. And I know you can do it. I know you can do it at a high level. And I have faith that this may be something that will stick in your head for a while. So proceed forward with my blessing. I wish you well. Please take this moment to add a little dose of steel to the spine and go forward.
We've reached the
Carry those standards. Thank you.
Robin, who is the next available speaker after Mr. Richardson? Mr. Halbertron?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Helterbraun, are you with us?
Hello? Am I on?
Yes, sir, we
Oh.
can hear you. Please proceed.
You can hear me now? Hello? All right. I'm, I guess a lot like Bruce and Martha in that I've been kind of fighting this situation at this location for a number of years. And I guess it all started for me several years back with regard to the noise that this OT Tavern used to be Red Jack, it used to be NSL, contributes to the neighborhood. But it's gotten so much worse. It's like if you're at a stop sign, I asked the board members here to envision that you're in your car, you're listening to the news, you pull up to a stoplight, and all of a sudden next to you pulls up a car. His stereo is up so loud that you can't hear yourself think, much less continue listening to the news. The guy that's driving that car looks over at you and just kind of giggles and laughs because he knows he's irritating the crap out of you. Well, that's the operator of OT Tavern is not dissimilar to this driver. He could care less about this neighborhood, continues to I don't know, would advocate, but allows his parking lot to be used for gatherings outside of his place of business. Matter of fact, the patrons, I would say, are not unlike him. I think they could care less about the neighborhood. 99% of the patrons of OT Tavern don't live anywhere near this location. Again, it's his loud music that got me started, but we've had scuffles and fights and shootings. And I've got a friend that still got a bullet hole in his car from having to dodge shooting down there back in October. But the other thing about the neighborhood is this is not, it's a residential neighborhood, really, close to Greenville Avenue, but on my street, which is less than 100 yards from this place, there are families, there are 4 children, and these cars that are driven by the patrons of OT Tavern speed up and down these streets. It gets dangerous. They park illegally. It's just a use that should not be allowed in this part of town. And I hope that you take that in consideration. I know none of you board members would want OT Tavern anywhere near your homes. There's just no way. It's ridiculous location for this kind of use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hilterbrand. We're going to go to the next speaker. 1 second.
None of the other speakers who signed up in the public testimony portion are online.
Okay, thank you, Reverend.
I just want to thank the public speakers for their time. I think the next matter to move on to is the uncontested cases. Do I have a motion? Mr. Vermillion.
Chair, I move that the Board of Adjustment grant the following applications listed on the uncontested docket because it appears from our evaluation of the property and all relevant evidence that this application satisfy all the requirements of the Dallas Development Code and are consistent with the general purpose and intent of the code as applicable to wit. BDA 201-066, application of Josh LeCompte for special exceptions to the visibility obstruction regulations contained in the Dallas Development Code are granted subject to the following condition. Compliance with the revised site plan is required. BDA 201-071, application of Josh LeCompte for a special exception to the visibility obstructions regulations contained in the Dallas Development Code is granted subject to the following condition. Compliance with the submitted site plan is required. BDA 201-072, application of Josh LeCompte for a special exception to the visibility obstruction regulations contained in the Dallas Development Code is granted subject to the following condition. Compliance with the submitted site plan is required. Finally, BDA 201-073, application of Josh LeCompte for a special exception to the visibility obstruction regulations contained in the Dallas Development Code is granted subject to the following condition. Compliance with the submitted site plan is required.
Is there a second?
Chair Brooks, I second.
Any need for discussion, or should we take a vote? All right, we're ready for a vote.
Thank you. Mr. Slade?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Vermillion?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Brooks?
Aye.
Thank you. And Mr. Saups? Sorry.
Aye.
Thank you very much. The vote is 4-0 in favor of the motion. The motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, the next case we're going to call, we reordered this this morning during briefing. So the first case we're going to call is BVA 190-090. The speakers for the applicant.
Who is the first speaker that we have that's with us? So the first speaker that we've had. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Robin. I'm so sorry, ladies. I did not quite hear that. Who is it? Stephen Dimmitt. Mr. Dimmitt, are you with us, sir? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony to the board? Please answer, I do.
I do.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes to address the board. Please
Oh,
begin
yes.
with your name and address.
Sure. Stephen Dimmitt, 1201 North Riverfront, Dallas, Texas. We're representing or asking for these 4 cases, BDA 190, 90, 91, 92, 93, that those be held until November to allow us to continue down the zoning path to get to City Council, which we anticipate getting there in November, which should resolve these issues. I'll reserve additional time if there's any questions. Thank you.
Were there any questions for Mr. Dimmitt from the panel? No? Okay. 1 second. The next speaker on the list would be Mr. Rob Baldwin for this
Hi,
case.
Mr.
BDA.
Baldwin. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony to the board? Please answer, I do.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank-
Rob Baldwin,
Thank
39
you. You may proceed.
Suite B in Dallas. And I'd just like to reiterate what Stephen just said. We've asked that these be held to November. We're getting along with our zoning, working really well. I think it's going to all be worked out. So we ask your indulgence to let us a couple more months to get this finalized. And I also am here to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldwin. Our next speaker on the list is Ann Shields.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, Mr. Slade had his hand up. Mr. Slade, you have a question?
I was gonna ask Mr. Baldwin
Sorry.
if he understood whether the other side was agreeable to this postponement as well. But if we have additional speakers lined up, he might not need to answer that for us.
I have spoken with Mr. Richardson and emailed with Mr. Northrup and let him know what we're proposing to do. And my understanding is, I can't speak for him, is they're supportive of us finalizing this, going through the zoning process rather than the Board of Adjustment process.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, Ms. Shields, are you with us?
Yes, thank you. I have nothing to add at this point. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. We can proceed then to Slew Welkerman.
Ms. Marchman, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Marchman. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony to the board?
I do.
Okay, you can please proceed to address the board. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I have nothing additional to add at this time except my support for the continuation while we work through the zoning process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our next speaker, Kristen Boyd.
Who, Jennifer?
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped to 91, I believe. Mike Northrup.
Neither Mr. Northrup or Roger Albright are online.
Okay, then those are all the speakers. Thank you, Robin. Those are all the speakers for this case.
There are no speakers in opposition to this case here.
Those were all the speakers who registered to speak. So at this time, let's see. If that included the two opponents were the last two who are not here. And so at this time, now it's back to the representative if they would like a rebuttal, but there's really nothing to rebut. So Mr. Baldwin already stated that they're good to go, and Mr. Dimmitt as well.
This is Rob Baldwin. There's no need for a rebuttal. There's no need for any of us to speak at any of the other hearing cases either. So unless you have questions on the other cases, we're not going to burden your time by speaking on the other ones. Thank you.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. Darren Tatalo says that he signed up to speak on this case as well. I didn't know if we all wanted to allow him the chance to say something.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hear from Mr. Patala.
Mr. Tatalo, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony to the board?
I do.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out on this one, by the way, I'm the vice president of the Lower Greenville Neighborhood Association where this property sits. And I want to point out that the landlord in this case, unlike the OT Tavern, has been highly cooperative. Both Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Dimmitt and the owner have worked with us to get this agreement in place. The process has already begun. We've had our first public meeting. There were probably 20 or more people from the neighborhood attend the first public meeting on this issue. There was no opposition. There were a lot of questions. All the questions were answered to everyone's satisfaction. And I have no qualms that this will easily sail through to the conclusion that we've all worked together to achieve. And I want to thank Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Dimmitt for their work. It's a win-win on this.
Thank you, Mr. Tatalo. I actually would like to add that Mr. Richardson, he signed up via email and not through our registration system, so his name is not on the list. And so he would be given an opportunity to speak as an opponent as well. Mr. Richardson, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony to the board?
Howdy. I do. Am I in?
Yes.
God, my writing is psychedelic. My apologies. This case is a perfect example of an applicant working diligently with the neighborhood. And in fact, we had an agreement 2 months, I think, ago that has continued, here you go, better lighting, that has continued to evolve, and the staff heard it 2 weeks ago, I believe. They're completely supportive of our work. This is an excellent example of a case where applicants and opponent came together and struck a deal. I'm fully supportive of the delay. We've tacked a month onto the delay, actually, just to ensure that we won't have to come back and beg for yet one more. So my blessings to this deal, and that's all of my input. Thank you very much.
And now there are no more speakers on this case.
Do I have a motion?
Sir Chair, can I jump in before you accept your motion to remind the maker that we need to postpone this to, or hold this under advisement to a date certain? So the November meeting of this board is November 17th, Wednesday, November 17th. So if that is your motion, please use that specific date.
Mr. Slade?
Before I entertain a motion, can I ask a question to Ms. Holmes as to whether we have, for each of these cases, requirement that we have separate motions, to the extent I'm moving to hold them under advisement? Can I, as we do with the uncontested case, list all four of them simultaneously?
You can have your motion cover all of the cases, but I would ask that you read each of the numbers into the record as you make your motion so that it's clear that it covers all of those cases.
Chair Brooks, I have a motion. I move that the Board of Adjustment in appeal numbers BDA 190-090, 190-091, 190-092, and 190-093. Hold this matter under advisement till the meeting of this panel on November 18th, 2021.
17th.
I'd like to amend that motion to be November 17th, 2021.
Second.
Sorry, 2021.
Okay, there's been a
You are
motion,
muted, Mr.
been
Slade.
seconded. Is there any discussion? I'll just make a comment. This seems like a situation that's working out really well. I think this was the plan between the applicant and the opponents all along. I'm glad they've diligently pursued a path to a better resolution than we could have given them like 5 months ago when we came here and had a pretty emotional hearing. So great. Let's take a vote.
Thank you. Chair Brooks?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Familia?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Slade?
Aye.
Thank you. And Mr. Schaus?
Aye.
Thank you. The vote is 4-0 in favor of the motion. The motion passes. Thank you.
I'll call the next case. It is DBA 201061. The application of Sean Parsons, represented by Santos Martinez of La Sierra Planning Group, for a variance to the front yard setback regulations.
Mr. Brooks, I do
We have the-
apologize. Have we already made an action on our consent, correct? So now we're just going to the regular items? So there's just one thing that
That's
we
correct, I
should
believe.
note. And that's just that with the regular items, it is similar, just for the public, for them to understand. It is similar to what you just saw. Each side will be granted 3 minutes to address the board according to the rules of procedure. We begin first with anyone in favor and then in opposition. And finally, the applicant is allowed to make a reply, and each person will receive 3 minutes, and time will be kept by the board secretary. And as you mentioned, we're on to 61, and you can proceed. I'm so sorry for that interjection.
Your help and clarification is much appreciated.
Santos Martinez is the speaker for 201061.
Correct. And is Mr. Martinez with us? Yes. Mr. Martinez, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony to the board?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please proceed with your name and address for the record.
Santos Martinez, 12 Tanager Terrace, Angel Fire, New Mexico, 87710. Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully request if we could combine this case and the next case, as they've been platted and preliminary approved to be considered as one lot. Although it's not a final plat, This way, we can just show both cases at the same time. It was a discretion that you allowed us at the last hearing.
So long as the city attorney doesn't object to that, I'm inclined to follow the lead of Chair Schwartz and grant you the same leeway. Ms. Holmes, we can do this, right?
You can discuss them at the same time, but when you are ready to make a motion, you'll need to specify which case you're making the motion on. So you can either make it on both cases, listing them both, or make a separate motion on each of them. But yes,
Thank you.
he can.
Did we alter the rules of procedure in terms of how much time the applicant and opponents get to speak, or are we still sticking with 3 minutes? What did we do last time? I guess I'm asking.
If I could ask for 6 minutes just to combine both cases, the 3 minutes apiece, I don't think I'm going to need all 6. And I don't know of any opposition to this case. I think it would be reasonable if there were, that they would be allowed the 6 minutes as well.
Yes, that's correct. There are no
I'm
other
fine with
speakers
6 minutes.
registered for these cases.
Okay, 6 minutes, Mr. Santos. You are free to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could share my screen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the property you have before you has been replatted, an attempt to replat, because it is not recognized as a building site as of yet. As you're familiar with the Dallas Development Code, if you're not a recognized building site, you have to submit a plat before you can get a building permit for the property. I just want to highlight some items. Trying to get my slide to advance. Here we go. The property is zone MF2, which the development standards for this property would allow us to build 44 apartments, 35 single-family homes. The proposal you see before you that the Plan Commission approved last year is just to limit it to 14 single-family homes through a shared access development. We believe this is compatible with the surrounding properties around us. There is a higher density multifamily property just to the east of us. We don't seek to be close to the density that they have. We would just like to, it makes sense that as you go from multifamily to the east to single family to the west, that there be some type of transition or stepping down of properties as you move westward on Oates. And we believe this is within that spirit of stepping down, even though it's entitled to do more. We believe 14 is appropriate. As I mentioned before, we can't really develop this property until we record the final plat because it's a shared access development. And the Plan Commission approved this preliminary plat application unanimously a little over a year ago. And, you know, we had modified our request from the application that you saw previously this spring, and that we took the building on the left and we shaved 5 feet. You'll notice that there's an angle to the property, and our building would actually line up with that angle. It is outside of our garage envelope, so we're not impacting the ability to park in the garage. That width would still be 20 feet. But you'll notice, and one of the standards is what is different from our property, we do have a curve here that it's not a uniform setback line. This building will have an angle to it. We cannot move this building back farther an additional 5 feet. The building on the east, we had 5 feet to slide everything back to make this work, and that's as most as we can go at a 20-foot setback rather than a 25-foot setback. And I want to point out that there are some additional elements in this application that we put in our letter to staff, that because it's a shared access development, there are additional standards that we cannot get variances for. For example, on the northern end of the property, there's a 3-foot barrier easement. There is no allowance for a variance to that 3 feet within the platting regulations. It's not that it's not within the zoning standards, it's within the platting standards, and it has to be 3 feet. Just below that, there's a 20-foot pavement section that has to be provided in order for this development to satisfy all the conditions that the engineering and water department are requiring. I noticed that there was no correspondence in your docket, but there was a question raised by the engineering department as to these items that we had mentioned in our write-up that was presented to staff, and that we cannot slide the buildings back any farther because then we create a conflict with either the paving standards of shared access or with the barrier standards in shared access, because shared access says you cannot access an alleyway and there has to be a barrier between us and the alley so no one physically attempts to drive down it. And in their response, they had also included some attachments to say, yes, the barrier easement must be 3 feet, and the pavement width must be 20 feet. And there's no allowance for us if we took an additional 5 feet and slid the building on the west back. We're now in conflict with this provision of the code. If the building on the east, we tried to move it back an additional 5 feet, well, now there's no 3-foot barrier easement that's required. Our plat was approved with these conditions that we can build up to 14 lots, that we still have to comply with the shared access standards. You'll notice here, number 29, that we have to have that 3-foot barrier in order for this project to get final permitted and passed, and that we also have to comply with all the other standards of shared access. And so I know in your briefing that there was some conversations about what it is you're reviewing on this property. I just want to highlight, we did not create this hardship. The property has been in this configuration since it was originally subdivided in 1959. If the alley had just been straightened out and running from west to east, I don't believe you would have an application before you, because we could slide things on the eastern portion back a bit and have more room, but that's just not how this subdivision was created. We are not creating an overbuild on the property. We believe this is a good transition to go to single family with multifamily to the east and traditional single family to the west. The property owner has had numerous conversations with their neighbors, and we just want to highlight, even at our last application, and even in this one, you have no registered speakers in opposition, and that's because the property owner has met with folks door to door, knocking on their porches to explain what we're trying to do. We've been up front with our neighbors to show we would like to build 14 homes, and they prefer that instead of 44 apartments. Even the 37 homes that we could build by right, 14 seems to be something to scale, and they want to see neighbors and their backyards and folks that there's not guest parking on Oates, it's in the back. We believe that this meets a lot of the compatibility requests that the neighbors have asked, but more important, that the property is different because these standards that we have to apply in order to make this work for single family, we aren't allowed to vary those standards. And in trying to slide the properties back as best we can,
Martinez, we are at the 6-minute mark.
That we'd ask for a favorable recommendation on both requests. Stand for any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vermillion.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, help me understand, you say that you have the ability to build 44 apartments, or you can build 35 single-family homes. Why can you not build 14 of these single-family homes in this shared access development and still respect the requirements of the front yard setback?
So there's two parts. In if we were to do 44 apartments, building, slide it to the 25 foot, and so you would be allowed to get the density that you would have with an MF2 overlay by taking just one big building, and you'd be allowed to go up to 36 feet in height at 3 stories and slide it back or maybe to the east to comply with the front yard setback. Your side yard and rear yard setbacks would be nominal for multifamily. I think you, but the scale for that would be comparable to what you're seeing already on Oates that's to the east of us. I think the single family options of over 30 lots, you're just going to see a lot smaller homes. You're not going to be able to move them in within the 25-foot setback. You just have smaller lots going back on the west and on the east and trying to comply. I think it would be probably a different application to try to find a variance to maybe allow tandem parking in order to make garages work on smaller lots. I think the shared access provisions make a lot of sense for this type of development at this scale, and that it really restricts the property to single family. The challenge is as we had already been approved by Plan Commission and that we'd already started our reviews for engineering plans, is when someone said your setback isn't 15 feet, it's now 25. And I think you'll see in our application, we've done what's best to try to get close to 25. And the fact that we actually have a building with a built-in angle to it to comply with at least a 20-foot setback, and that we've moved our building back as best we can on the east. I'd also like to point out that an aerial of the surrounding properties on single family on Oates, they're more at a 20-foot rather than a 25 compliance, that it would seem to be lining up. I don't know, and this could be for a number of factors. The building to the east of us does not have a 25-foot setback. And it could be that someone said, well, it's multifamily, it's a 15-foot setback, and not realize if you just went farther west that that's an R75 and the whole block's supposed to be at 25. And so I don't think that today there's actual uniformity of a 25-foot standard on that block. We are trying as best we can with the other provisions of the code to at least get closer to the spirit of a 25, and the fact that it's been reconstructed to redesign, your house is going to have an angle in it, and the green space on the east, we had to just remove it. I do want to point out that does not mean that we're not in compliance with the other green space, open space standards of shared access. That still needs to be at least 10% of the overall project, and we can comply with that. But by providing single family and using the shared access regulations, you do have some benefits in bringing single family onto the property, but there are other standards that we just can't get variances to, and we've tried our best to balance both. And I don't think it's fair for the neighbors, because in talking to the property owner with his neighbors, they understand that apartments could be put here. And we also understand that the city of Dallas has a housing shortage of at least 20,000 units. We still don't think that that would be a good fit to cram the 44 units on this lot because it's entitled to it. We think it's a better transition to put at least 14 single family homes. It's just the challenge is the method to do it has provided.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I think you answered Mr. Vermillion's question. I wanted to ask you just some questions about the standard that we have to judge this variance by. So we have three standards here. The first is that it's not contrary to the public interests when owing to special conditions, a literal enforcement of this chapter would result in unnecessary hardship, and so that the spirit of the ordinance will be observed and substantial justice done. Can you sort of speak to that standard? Why is this not contrary to the public interest, and why would a literal enforcement of this chapter result in unnecessary hardship?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We believe 14 single-family homes is compatible, and that a literal interpretation of dropping this from 14 to 12 has no public value or benefit to the neighborhood. That the neighbors, and also within the city standards, that we could have built more. We could have chosen to overdevelop, but a literal interpretation means that for the sake of 5 feet, we have to give up 2 additional dwelling units that the Plan Commission said is compatible and recommended approval unanimously. That's where I believe the literal interpretation and the compatibility comes in with the scale that's being proposed, as opposed to what could have been done by right. And I do think the other provisions of your standard, we would argue the lot itself, it's not uniform. You've got an angled on the west side that impacts the actual design of the building, and on the east side, it's not of the same length. If the alley had just gone straight across to give us the same depth, but we still have the angled portion on the western half of the property.
Okay, I see what you're saying there. The alley kind of jumps down at the back of the property too, instead of going across straight. So you're dealing with a curve at the front, or
And a curve in the
I guess
back.
a slight angle at the front, and then a little dog leg here at the back. Okay.
That's correct. So
And
we
then,
don't have rectangles. We don't have flat rectangles on either side. That's correct.
and then I think we answered the second standard there, or at least you addressed it. And then the last one is that this is not granted to relieve a self-created or personal hardship or for financial reasons only, in order to permit any person of privilege in developing a parcel of land not permitted by this chapter to other parcels of land with the same zoning. Could you speak to that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think when this property was first subdivided in 1959, and it shows those curves and those angles, we didn't create that segment of the hardship. You know, the other provision is that we're in utilizing the tools and the platting regulations to make this at a more comparable scale. We are just at a spot where these provisions cannot be varied. And if you want to ask engineering staff to confirm that, I believe that was part of their correspondence in the earlier part of August, is that 3 feet is 3 feet. You can't slide this or remove this. 20 feet is 20 feet. And we didn't create that hardship. That's something we're trying to work with in the city code. But the overall configuration of the property has been in this format since 1959, and the boundaries as such. So this isn't for if we had done something to the property and regraded it or something along those lines that had been self-inflicting. I don't believe we've done any of that.
Thank you. Mr. Vermillion.
Mr. Martinez, when why didn't y'all just build 12 units and respect the setback?
When this was prepared over a year ago, there were conversations with staff as to how this application could move forward. It was done with 15 foot as setback, and that's how it went forward in July of 2020 and going to the Plan Commission. That's how it's gone forward with our engineering plans for review. It was after all of that had occurred that we were notified by staff, it's not a 15 foot, it's a 25 foot. And so I think that, things could have been different if up front we had been notified it's not a 15, it's a 25. But we had already gone past these approval thresholds to be notified now things are back at an additional 10 feet. And so that's how we are where we are today, is that we're trying to now catch up after 14 lots had been approved and reviewed by Plan Commission, and conversations with the neighbors to try to build 14 houses. Now we've got to go back and readjust. And the original design had been for 14 because that's how we had been instructed to move forward.
Are there any other questions from board members for Mr. Martinez? Okay, thank you for your time, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you.
Okay, now that we have closed our discussion, it is time for a motion, and I would remind the board members that we can always have a long discussion after someone makes a motion. Mr. Slade.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I move that the Board of Adjustment in appeal number BDA 201-061 on application of Santos Martinez grant the 5-foot variance to the front yard setback regulations requested by this applicant. As our evaluation of the property and testimony shows that the physical character of this property is such that a literal enforcement of the provisions of the Dallas Development Code as amended results in unnecessary hardship to this applicant.
Is there a
Are you
second?
going to make a motion for both cases or just the one?
Matt Schaus, second.
Ms. Munoz, I understood Ms. Holmes to advocate that we keep them separate apart on the two to make sure we specified. And so I was presenting the motion with my current position on one for purposes of facilitating a discussion amongst the board, then decide on it, knowing that the second motion could follow quickly.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Schaus.
All right, so we've had a motion
Second that
and a
motion.
second from Mr. Schaus. Is there any discussion? Mr. Slade.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. In looking at this and considering our standard, I was convinced in particular by the letter presented by the applicant about it and understand how it meets the specific standards given the quirks of the two lots and the desire to move things forward, to be able to perform what they had. And then doesn't appear to be another configuration that worked for what was approved, and that it isn't a self-created hardship, nor do I view it as something that's for pure financial reasons, part because it is supplying additional housing. That's why I came down in support of granting the 5-foot variance to the setback.
I'll chime in. I'm also going to support the motion. I think there is evidence in the record to support all three elements required for this variance. I think the applicant has moved the property back as much as they could. I think they were thrown for a loop by the 25-foot setback requirement. I don't think 5 feet is really going to make a difference here. While I would have loved to have actually heard from some neighbors who are supportive of this, because they're the ones who are going to have to look at it, that none of them speaking in opposition is good enough for me.
Mr. Chairman, Charles Trammell, Development Code Specialist. Was there a condition set on these two cases?
Mr. Trammell, the motion did not include a condition. That may have been my oversight in the form of motion that I reviewed. But of course, I would be happy. I'd be happy to amend the motion. I'd be happy to amend the motion, provided Mr. Schaus seconded it, that compliance with the provided site
Give
plan.
me just a moment, Mr. Slade, please.
Mr. Vermillion.
I may, sounds like I'm probably outnumbered here, but I know that my vote is important in this issue, and I'm not moved by the evidence. Typically, when applicants come into the Board of Adjustment for a front yard setback variance, it's because they have an R75A lot, which is typically rectangular in shape, and for reasons of it's on a corner or there's some creek or something, or the road curves, that they have a funky lot. And they want to build a 3,600 square foot house, just like all their neighbors, but they can't because if they've got multiple front yard setbacks. Here's a situation where we've got two lots that are basically existing single family residential lots that at some point in the past were zoned multifamily. I'm not sure if there is a typical multifamily shape. We don't get these a lot, but one could look at it that the applicant bought two pieces of property, went to the Plan Commission to have them replatted. One of those pieces of property is bigger than the other. But when you put them together, they have this funky curve in them. I have trouble when people come to the Board of Adjustment when they've got basically a blank canvas. In this situation, they could build 35 homes or 40 something apartments, but they go down the path of having this architecturally engineered whatever, and they figure out that somebody screwed up and didn't follow the rules. In this situation, it hasn't been built yet. Sometimes people come and the buildings are already built, and we really have a tough time on those discussions. But I'm not sure I understand how the hardship standard has been met. And furthermore, city staff on variances, they do give us a recommendation. The recommendation on here is to deny. And I don't think that they typically make those recommendations lightly, but they do objectively weigh the evidence here. And so we haven't voted yet, and I'm not saying that I'm going to vote no, but I would like maybe someone else to sway me, because I really don't want to be the guy that kills this deal. But anyway, that's all I got to say right now.
I think I can speak to this a little bit. What has me, excuse me, my vote is based upon the standards that we are evaluating for what this variance is. And also, another issue I'm considering, which informs that, is the 25-foot setback here that's not every house on the street. That's just some. I think during briefing it was explained that when you've got two different zonings on one street, you have to respect the furthest setback, but not all those houses are set 25 feet back. Some of them are set 20. So it's really no different a use than, or it's really no different a setback than many of the other houses on the same street have. So a 5-foot setback to me is not a particularly compelling or it's not that big of a deal in common parlance.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. And Matt, I think you raised some really great points as you contemplate that and think about how this comes up in most cases for us. And I think you're exactly right. And in most cases for us, when it's about building a commensurate property or being subject to some other wrinkle with your property that restricts your ability to do something that's very similar to everything else around it, that to me is one reason why I'm suggesting we support this motion and provide for these variances. Because the third element of us is to ensure that we don't permit any person or privilege in developing this parcel of land, subject site, that wouldn't be afforded to other parcels of land and districts with the same MF to a zoning classification. Well, this was platted and approved under that, which provided for a 15-foot setback and not a 20. And to the point that Mr. Brooks raised that I thought was pretty compelling and something we talked about during the briefing was that aerial shot that I believe the property owner submitted this morning and was provided to us via email. And that, I'm not going to try to share my screen here, has a couple satellite images of the property. And without going into whether some other homes nearby are 20 or 25 feet, it does provide the visual, which is whether this setback is something that is a definitive element kind of the neighborhood or how it is. And if you look at it, because the subject property for this particular case is the one that has the angle, you watch that angle play out quite visually on the aerial with these other homes because of how they're all stacked precisely to meet this bit. And I feel like what the proposed plan for the applicant is designed to sort of match that and do that. And even to the point where they're quite literally taking a square unit and slicing it a little bit of a way over to do what I believe the spirit of the ordinance will be observed and substantial justice done, which is part of our first. So again, I appreciate your positions and understand where you're coming down, and you can look at this evidence and conclude differently than it sounds present Mr. Brooks or I might be. But that is sort of how I am assessing, looking at, and thinking about this, and why I'm coming to support the motion.
Yes.
Guys, I appreciate the comments, and I see where you're coming from, and I do appreciate the fact that they came back with a modified plan, and so we did give the neighborhood, I guess, five more feet. And look, front yard setback to me is kind of sacred. It's once you go there, you can't go back, right? And the previous go round, there was a neighbor that had some issues. Granted, this is a new case, and that person has either been converted or doesn't know about it or doesn't care. So, look, I'm gonna. One thing that concerns me sometimes about the Board of Adjustment is that we do just kind of go along with things, and I'm not pointing any one particular person out or anything, but I think that it is good to have these discussions because, as one of the public speakers mentioned, this is a very important board, and granting these exceptions. I've actually had some people tell me that you should never grant a variance. The rules are the rules, and they're there for a reason, and so I'm going to respect the opinions that you guys have, and I am going to support this for those reasons. But since we are on the record here, and those of everybody that's on this call in the planning world, that we have these rules for a reason, and they need to be. I believe they need to be respected in so far that is possible, and so. I'm going to go ahead and support this because I don't want to be the killer on this, but just Mr. Martinez and the applicant, just next time let's make sure we understand the setbacks before we start doing plans. Thank you, Chair.
Is there any other discussion?
Before we take a vote, Mr. Trammell had asked a question about whether it was conditioned on anything. I had hoped to hear from him and or Ms. Holmes, who's popped on, in case there is something we need to be mindful of.
Yes, the request was that this be conditioned upon the submitted site plan, which I apologize was not on the motion that you received. So if you would choose to amend your motion, you could just use the language that we've used before, conditioned on the submitted plan.
Chair Brooks, I would like to amend my motion so that it is conditioned on the submitted site plan. Ask that Mr. Schaus agree to second that so that that can be the motion upon which we.
I second it.
Any discussion?
No further discussion here.
Okay, I think we're ready to take a vote.
Thank you. Chair Brooks?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Slade?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Shells?
Aye.
Yeah, Mr. Vermillion?
Aye.
Thank you. The vote is 4-0 in favor of the motion. The motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to call the next case, which is BDA 201-062. This is the companion case to 2009 Oates Drive, application of Sean Parson, represented by Santos Martinez of La Sierra Planning Group for variance to the front yard setback regulations. We were discussing these two cases in tandem. I don't believe Mr. Martinez wanted to speak on this, the same issue again, so I would suggest we move straight to a motion. Mr. Slade, would you mind making a motion again?
Yes, indulge me 3 seconds, Mr. Chair, while I get up the right one to make sure I have it right. Thank you. I move that the Board of Adjustment in appeal number BDA 201-062 on application from Santos Martinez grant the 5-foot variance to the front yard setback regulations requested by this applicant because our evaluation of the property and testimony shows that the physical character of this property is such that a literal enforcement of the provisions of the Dallas Development Code as amended would result in a necessary hardship to this applicant. I further require this motion require the applicant to comply with the submitted site plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Let's vote.
Yeah, Chair Brooks?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Shells?
Aye.
Yeah, Mr. Vermillion?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Slade?
Aye.
Thank you. The vote is 4-0 in favor of the motion. The motion passes. Thank you.
I'd like to call the next case, BDA 201-023. This is concerning 3606 Greenville Avenue, Suite A, the application of the Dallas City Council Resolution 20-1935 to require compliance of a non-conforming use. We've been informed that the city has reached a settlement with that a settlement has been reached. I would ask the city attorney if we need to read the procedure for a compliance hearing, or if we need to hear from the applicants. We don't do these very often.
Mr. Chair, if you are interested in hearing about the settlement agreement, you could offer 3 minutes or such time as you think is necessary for both sides to present the settlement that they've agreed to. And then you all could take a vote as to whether you would like to accept that settlement, which would be through a motion to deny either with or without prejudice, which would drop the case from your docket and allow the settlement to take effect.
I think we should give the applicant and opponent each 3 minutes to brief us about the settlement agreement and what action they would like us to take. So, the applicant, you may proceed.
Thank you. So after much discussion, the city and OT Tavern, as well as the landlord for 3606 Greenville, have entered into a mutual agreement. One of the terms, or I guess if you'd like to know some of the terms, 1:15 is when they customers, and they'll stop serving at 1:30. And beginning November 19, 2021, between Sunday and Wednesday, Sundays through Wednesdays, they would actually stop admitting new customers at 12:15 and stop making sales at 12:30. They're increasing their security and will also include off-duty police officers as part of that security. They will provide complimentary valet as well. They'll have parking signage, engage in community meetings and have comments. They have a specific email address already set up in order to take comments from the community. They will increase the number of security cameras, ensure that there's no more litter, turn off outdoor speakers at sunset, and ensure that all doors and windows remain closed to reduce the noise. And they would also have a trained crowd manager. And what that is basically a person who counts and makes sure that they don't go over their occupancy, and just maintain the crowd control. They agree to cease the operation by August 7th, 2023. And so with that, if the board approves this agreement, then we would ask that we withdraw or ask that you dismiss the case without prejudice. Are there any questions?
I do have a question, I guess more procedural. So the city council passed a resolution for this case to be prosecuted at the Board of Adjustment. Does the city council not, are they giving the city attorney's office the free rein to negotiate settlements, or does the city council have to approve this? How does that work?
The city attorney's office has been keeping council in the loop with each part of the process, as well as the particular councilman in which this property is in his district. So the council member who raised the resolution, or that district where the resolution was raised, is on board with the settlement agreement, and the rest of council has been notified.
Is there any mechanism, because I know for a case non-conforming to get to the Board of Adjustment, it's got to be pretty bad, and it's a pretty long process to get there. Is there any mechanism to where this case, if they violate this settlement agreement, is fast-tracked, if you will, or do the neighbors? Because one of the things I'm concerned about is that the neighbors seem to not be real thrilled with this. And are we basically starting this all over again if they violate the settlement agreement, and then it's 2 years?
If they violate the settlement agreement, the city still reserves the right to bring forward a case before the BDA or before district court if necessary.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Green.
Depending on your motion, Mr. Vermillion, if you move to dismiss this without prejudice, that would allow the city to return to the Board of Adjustment within that 2-year period, should it need to be readdressed, or as Ms. Green said, take it to district court.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes.
Mr. Slade.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Is anything conditioned in the settlement agreement on this board actually dismissing the action? Or is the obligation simply for the city to seek or request it be dismissed?
So the board would have to approve the agreement, as well as move to deny or dismiss without prejudice for this agreement to go into effect. They have 5 business days to implement those terms that I stated earlier.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for the applicant. Thank you for your time.
With us today, we also have the representative for the opponent, Ms. Kimberly Quirk.
Good afternoon. I don't have much to add to what Ms. Green had to say. I feel that she represented the terms of the settlement agreement accurately. The only thing that I would add specifically was to address the question by Mr. Vermillion. The agreement also specifies that if necessary, the city could seek injunctive relief to address any immediate concerns that were to arise. So while I don't believe there's any process for expediting a Board of Adjustment case like this one, there were other avenues that the city have open to them through this agreement that would be more immediate. And I'll reserve any time if you guys have any questions.
I don't believe there are any further questions. Are there any additional speakers? Or Ms. Green, do you have a rebuttal to Ms. Quirk?
There's no rebuttal. I mean, I did speak to the members that actually called in earlier, the individuals, and spoke to them about the agreement. And they understand that although they don't get exactly what they want, that they believe that it is a good settlement, or it is a decent settlement. So the city, didn't move forward without keeping council and the residents included in this process as well. So we just ask again that that the board approve the settlement and that we're able to move forward, and you can deny this case without prejudice. Thank you.
All right, I think that closes the public portion of. Mr. Slade, could you give me a little feedback? Thank you. This would normally be where I call for a motion, but I'm going to offer that motion myself. I move that the Board of Adjustment and Appeal Number BDA 201-023 deny the applicant's request for expedited compliance without prejudice because, based on the terms of the agreement entered into by the applicant and the property owner, we find that continued operation of this non-conforming use will not have an adverse effect on nearby properties.
I'll second.
Discussion, Mr. Slade?
I'm wondering if for future cases, we need to possibly tweak the language of this motion. Because the motion suggests that we find the continued operation of this non-conforming use will not have an adverse effect. Since that was our standard, I'm wondering whether we would want to vote nay on the motion that's pending, or amend it such that it would be, we find that the continued operation of this non-conforming use, provided the respondent comply with the terms of the agreement by the applicant and the property owner, will not have an adverse effect on nearby properties. Because I wouldn't want this motion to possibly be used as a justification if the city later has to proceed with seeking injunctive relief and coming back before us. I realize that might be overly concerned about it, but I know that there was a compliance case yesterday where one of the points in terms of the agreement was that the property owner acknowledged that there was an adverse impact on nearby properties. I wouldn't want this to flip quite literally the other way. That's my thought.
I agree. It does seem a little strange that we're making a finding on whether or not there's an adverse effect on nearby properties. I'm at least somewhat comforted by the fact that our holding here has no precedential value, and I hope that if this comes up we enter into a long discussion about what that actually means, which means we can't rely on it at all. But if there's if the, I think we'd like the input of Ms. Holmes if we could get it.
If you wanted to amend the language of your motion to reflect Mr. Slade's comments, you could insert compliance with the terms of the agreement, which I think is the point that you were getting to. It's not just that the agreement was entered into, it's actually that its terms are being complied with. And therefore, that's what should hopefully remove that adverse effect on the neighborhood. So it would be, sorry. So it would be based on compliance with the terms of the agreement entered into by the applicant and the property owner, Mr. Brooks, if you wanted to make that amendment.
Well, hold on. Let me throw another wrench in here. I'm a little hesitant to base this on terms of an agreement I haven't seen. I mean, I understand what the terms are that have been represented to me, and I have no reason to suspect that it's not correct. Just, again, maybe we're saved that it's not precedent, but I hate to incorporate anything into this order we've never seen before.
Well, you could withdraw your motion and your second could agree to that, and you could take up an alternate motion to hold under advisement until next month. So you have a chance to read the settlement agreement and then take a vote on it at that time if you agree with the settlement agreement.
Are we required to provide a rationale for denying the expedited compliance without prejudice, or can we end the motion that we just deny it?
You can just end the motion. Just say deny
Okay.
with or without prejudice.
All right, I have a motion. Oh, excuse me. Do we need to vote on the existing motion?
I think it would be easier to amend your existing motion. I'd like you to read it in its entirety as an amended motion, and your second will need to agree.
Okay. I move to amend my motion by striking it in its entirety and inserting the new language. I move that the Board of Adjustment in appeal number BDA 201-023 deny the applicant's request for expedited compliance without prejudice.
Matt Shell, second.
Any discussion? All right, if there's no discussion, let's take a vote.
Thank you. Chair Brooks?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Schaus?
Aye.
Mr. Slade?
Aye.
Mr. Vermillion?
Aye.
Thank you. The vote is 4-0 in favor of the motion. The motion passes. Thank you.
I believe that concludes all of the business before the Board of Adjustment today. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Matt Shell, so I move that we adjourn for today.
Second.
Second? No. You can put Mr. Slade as the second, I think, there. All right. I don't believe we need a roll call for this one, so I think we can all just vote at once. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can we call the time, please? Chair Brooks, thank you.
Sure. We are adjourned at 2:35 p.m. on August 18th, 2021. Thank you all.
you.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Yep, thank you.